Welcome to Thoreau's Legacy, a Modern Lyceum, the first conversation in what we hope will become an annual series. Our Modern Lyceum brings back the movement that spawned adult education in America with public forums that promoted thoughtful conversation and education about the social, intellectual, and ethical questions of 19th century society. Thoreau was active in Concord's Lyceum and was even elected to serve as both secretary and curator between 1838 and 1840. Moreover, the Lyceum became both an important platform for Thoreau to share his work, as well as an instrument for his learning from others. In our Modern Lyceum, we will explore current day topics through the perspectives of Thoreau and his contemporaries, as we know their writings and philosophies still offer genuine wisdom that can be applied to the issues of today. I'm Whitney Ritalik, the Director of Education at the Walden Woods Project. A little bit about the Walden Woods Project. It was started 25 years ago by recording artist Don Henley to protect a specific parcel of land in Walden Woods that was threatened to be developed into a large office park. Don had been hugely impacted by Thoreau's ideas and writings in his youth and thought, if Walden Woods, this place that inspired the incredible writings of Thoreau and others, if that place was not sacred, then what place was? The Walden Woods Project successfully protected that parcel and has since conserved another dozen areas in Walden Woods. The Walden Woods Project now also maintains the Thoreau Institute Library, which houses the world's most extensive collection of Thoreau-related artifacts, documents, and offers a wide range of educational resources and programming to students, educators, researchers, and the general public. I've been doing a lot of thinking about the topic of technology and society in the months leading up to this event, reading Bill's book, which I do highly recommend, although it didn't get here in time for today, unfortunately. Perusing the various places where Thoreau comments on the technology of his day. And I even, subconsciously probably, imposed an unintentional technology respite on myself when I forgot my cell phone at home when I was on vacation last week. I'm happy to report that I survived, and it was actually quite wonderful. But what would Thoreau have thought of my intense discomfort in those first few phoneless hours, and then about my resignation, and then ultimately the delight I did feel of not being the tool of that tool while on vacation? I look forward to gaining insight on that and much more from the conversation tonight. Tonight's moderator will be Dr. Sarah Luria, who will introduce herself and the panelists. Thank you.
Hi, thanks so much for coming. Thanks to my students for coming and any other students who are here. Thanks to WPI for hosting us and Jim for helping that out. I teach at Holy Cross. I'm a professor of 19th century American literature. I work and write on Thoreau, and right now I'm working on a book called The Art of Surveying, for whom Thoreau was the great starting inspiration. So let me introduce the rest of our panelists. We have Dr. Kristen Case, who's an associate professor at the University of Maine in Farmington, teaching courses in American literature, environmental writing, intersection of 20th and 21st century American literature and philosophy. She's also the editor of the Concord Saunterer, outgoing editor after a 2-3-year stint. Anyway, great honor. The Concord Saunterer, a journal of Thoreau studies, co-editor of Thoreau at 200 Essays and Reassessments, which is forthcoming. And she's working with her students now to develop Thoreau's Calendar, a digital archive of Thoreau's phenological manuscripts, a word she will decipher for us later when she talks about that work, and is making the calendar, Thoreau's Calendar, available for the first time in its entirety. Jeffrey Kramer is the curator of collections and the resident scholar at the Walden Woods Institute, Walden Wood Project's Thoreau Institute. He's consulted by hundreds of researchers and students and educators from around the world each year in their studies of Thoreau and the Transcendentalists. He's the editor of numerous books, including a fully annotated edition of Walden. Is that over there? It's really beautiful. The portable Thoreau, which I use for teaching. I, to myself, an annotated selection from the Journal of Henry David Thoreau, and most recently, the portable Emerson. So check out the books after the session. William Powers got started as a journalist for the Washington Post, and his writing has appeared in the Atlantic, the New York Times, and many other publications. He's the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Hamlet's Blackberry, Building a Good Life in the Digital Age. which looks to Thoreau and a handful of other thinkers throughout history for insight into better living better lives during times of technological expansion, such as we are undergoing now. He's currently at the MIT Media Lab with a research group that's trying to reinvent social media. Hear, hear. So I thought, just to get us started, a lot of people think that Thoreau was anti-technology. He's the guy who said, simplify, simplify, went to live in the woods. So how do you understand Thoreau's relationship to technology, and how would you understand phrases like, we've become the tools of our tools, which certainly sounds, or the railroads, we don't ride the railroads ride us. So just all this for the panel.
Sure, I'll start. I'll say I think Thoreau's relationship to technology, like his relationship to everything, was complicated and changing, and changed in the course of the many years that he wrote in his journal, and over the many years he wrote and revised Walden. He's such a nuanced thinker and such a investigator of life that it's very easy to find sentences that seem to make him, for example, a vegetarian, a pro-hunting, anti-technology, pro-technology. But the truth is, it's I think it was quite complicated for him, and I think that he, the railroad, for instance, I mean, that the passage in Sounds is quite enamored of the railroad, whereas in the other passage he's really condemning it. So I think. I think it's hard to pin him down to a simple one-liner. I think he really believed in a continual evaluation of things in our lives, of the things that we use and the ways that we use them. And so I think that's what he would have advocated more than get rid of smartphones or get rid of Twitter or whatever. Think about how we use the things that we have and whether we want to use them.
Use them deliberately.
Yeah, use them deliberately.
Yeah, and I would agree with what Kristen said. I mean, basically, we create the Thoreau we want to see. We can pull quotations, texts that create that man that we want him to represent. But he is very complex, and he does, in most of his writings, question things, constantly question and reevaluate, as well as say, we'll write antithetical sentences. But technology was, in his day, the thing. The railroad, steam had been improving. He had a pencil factory. He used the best publishers of his day, which were using the best technology to get his words out there. The train with which he had a complex relationship was also a tool that allowed him to go to Boston, to the Athenaeum, or to Cambridge, to the Harvard Library in a short amount of time. So he definitely used those tools. He just didn't let those tools run his life. I mean, just one example, he talks about the train and how farmers used to be able to tell time by the sun and by their experience with the land and with nature, but grew to actually set their timepieces by when the train went by. So that's an example of that tool sort of ruling our lives.
So I don't disagree with anything Kristen and Jeff said, but I want to share an impression I took away from this. I sort of did an immersion in Thoreau for my book, where I used a bunch of philosophers from the past to help us think about life in the digital age, and Thoreau's one of them. And I did this kind of immersion, and I was in touch with Jeff at the time, and he helped me make sense of, generously helped me make sense of Thoreau. And I came away feeling he has a bias against new technology. Maybe because he's still wrestling with it, but I feel like, if it's, for example, he seems fine with newspapers and books and that level of delivery of information, slower delivery. But then once it can come by telegraph, he's very angry that you'll be getting gossip from Europe instantaneously.
Right.
The Princess Adelaide has a cold, or whatever that line is. Who needs to know that? So I feel like he's one of these people, and I have a part of me that's like this, that is, stop. It's too much, and you're intruding on my peace and quiet that I really need, which is true. I mean, technology does that, and he was speaking up for that point of view. But I feel like there is that leaning against the new, and let's not rush into it, basically.
So technology is a big word. Can we get a little bit more, following up on what you've just said? how would you compare, what would you want to bring out about what Thoreau might appreciate about the technology of a pencil, that, and what's got him riled about the telegraph, for instance, or how do those things compare, or a pencil versus an iPad, if you want to go to something kind of.
Well, I could jump in and say that I would think that he thinks of the pencil as just naturally an expression of one person's innermost thoughts or knowledge that they want to share. It sort of lends itself directly to that. It's just you using the pencil, going out via, say, a book to another person. So it has this wonderful kind of direct, he loved the depth in relationships, and so it really seems like a natural way to do that, person to person. The iPad, all of a sudden you're in touch with potentially hundreds of millions of people, and it seems to me, again, this bias against the new and the too much, that would strike him as, what's the point of that? It's all going to be surface. We're going to be skating the surface, never going deep if we're on something like an iPad. I'm saying that would be his maybe even knee-jerk response.
Whereas I look at it a little differently in that if Thoreau was using an iPad or a laptop as a tool, as a writer, I don't imagine any writer today writes without a laptop, so I would think he would definitely want to use one. The fact that Thoreau did so much research before he went anywhere, Cape Cod, Maine, wherever he was going, he went to the libraries and read books, looked at maps, did all of that, to be able to do that research sitting at his desk and be able to have that information at hand, I think would be an amazing tool for him. However, if that little Bing went off saying you have email, I don't think he'd give a damn. So there's that dichotomy, to use it as a tool to say this is here for me to use, but I will not let it run my life.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I mean, I think Thoreau was, in my view, I think he had a really early understanding of the way that all texts are deeply intertextual, so that that Walden is replete with references to lots of other texts, classical texts especially, but and so I think for him even the book was a way of engaging other times and places and compiling them and pulling them together. I think he loved that kind of time travel through the technology of the book and through writing, and that kind of early networking that was happening in writing. And so I guess I agree. I mean, he hated distraction, and he hated superficiality, and he hated the kind of busyness, the busy, bustling, nervous 19th century he talked about. I mean, I think he would feel that we were, of course, only more that way today. But I'm not sure, I mean, sometimes I wonder if it's really worth saying, like, what would Thoreau have thought of this today? Who knows? But I don't know that the kinds of things that he wanted to do are made impossible by technology. I think he would have done them anyway with technology.
To kind of line you guys up again, then, would you say, you'd say it's not so necessarily the new that he's bothered by, but it's an issue of control. The important thing is this a technology I can control, or is it controlling me? Do I have fewer resources to be able to control, the inundation through the wires? As long as I can control it, then I'm, I'll take it on.
Or what am I losing? What am I giving up by
Yeah.
using this tool?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he seemed to be against, this is different from control, but he
Yeah.
seemed to be against communication just for its own sake.
Yeah.
For the buzz you get, now we call it a dopamine squirt, In his time it was something else.
Yeah.
And he did complain, as you know, again, about old technologies when they became that, like he complained, this passage I love to read from one of his speeches, he complains about people going to the post office over and over, getting addicted to checking their mail.
Yeah.
That's the Romans invented the postal service, so
Yeah.
that was nothing new.
Yeah.
And that bothered him if you weren't doing it for a reason that was more than just checking,
Yeah.
like we do all day long.
Right. in the almost kind of, yes, maybe because of the dopamine effect, we can't quite control our response. So I was going to ask one of those questions, Kristen, but.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, just because the image still sticks in my mind, which is I once was at Walden Pond and I saw the actor Richard Gere, which of course completely derailed the field trip because now nobody was interested in going to the house. They all wanted to see what Richard Gere's next move. And there was Richard Gere facing Walden Pond talking on his cell phone. And I thought, there's something really wrong with this picture. So just, given the sort of range of latitude you've given him in terms of his potential response for things, and he isn't necessarily anti-talking on your cell phone at Walden Pond, you want to just say, if not, Kristen, any of you, how might Thoreau have handled that situation by being too,
The only thing I would say about that is I think actually, I am like such a participant in this, and I support all efforts to commemorate all things Henry. But I would say, I think he'd be deeply creeped out, and he would hate that he has been made into this kind of institution. I do. I think I can hold both of those views. I want it, and so I don't mind that it goes against something that. So I actually think he would object to the idea that, like, oh no, you can't do this normal activity at Walden Pond because it's like a sacred ground to Henry. I think he would hate that. That he was I don't think he, I don't know. I think he was very wary of becoming a guru or a kind of guide that people follow. That wonderful conclusion of Walden where he says, I've worn too deep a groove in the path down to the pond. It's time for me to go, and I think he really took pains to say, I'm not setting myself up as someone who wants to have followers, So I guess that would be my slightly.
But to also look at the fact that the person, Richard Gere, whoever it is not experiencing Walden Pond, and that so many people now are documenting their lives through their phones as opposed to experiencing it. Years ago, my family and I went to a Jackson Browne concert, and everybody has their phones out filming the concert, and he actually stopped in the middle and said, put those phones down, be here, listen to the music, that's what you're here for, put those phones down. And so many people are just have to document everything in their lives as opposed to experiencing it, and then they have to share it. So with social media, the big storm the other day, after the storm, I don't know how many of your friends posted pictures of the snow outside. How many pictures do you ever see of what your neighbor is eating for dinner, or whatever? So people are losing that sense. It's, as you said, skating on the surface. People aren't experiencing it, they're just showing it.
But, okay, so I'm going to be the total contrarian there. So, but I also think that he for all I said about him being biased against the new, he also has these wonderfully open-minded moments, obviously, and receptive. And so I could imagine him seeing that scene, and I don't know, I've seen a lot of Richard Gere movies. He seems like kind of a spiritual person.
That's the whole surprise of it.
So maybe he was so inspired that he was calling someone he loves, and who knows, just composing a poem in the moment and saying it on the phone. You can do that too. I'm open to that. I don't know.
I also take Kristen's point that we should avoid the what would Henry say, what would Henry do, WWHD. But that said, so to go with Bill, I'm sure everybody resonated with what Jeffrey was saying. What is it about not being able to put your phone down when you're at nature, about wanting to record or wanting to watch a concert through the phone? Don't you, one, feel like you can do both? Like, I'm at the concert and I'm also recording it. Like, it is, we know we have this capability to live in both those veins. But I guess the way I really wanted to take this was, can that cell phone, can recording Walden Pond while I'm there, does that become my journal? Does that become my way of seeing more closely? Because now I'm zooming in. Because now I can go and identify the species. This gets a little bit at what the calendar is doing, and whether this could be our own calendar, and maybe you can talk about the calendar after we first talk about that question. But can, with Bill's sort of open mind, maybe you're doing good work with that phone at Walden Pond. What do you?
Well, nobody's ever said I have an open mind, so it's difficult.
And the phone phone getting us closer to nature in that sense.
Yeah, I can see for documenting. I mean, Thoreau made sketches in his journal, so he'd remember what a plant was, all of that. So I can see using your phone or a camera to document. I also feel it's disruptive. So if Thoreau were in the woods and he wanted to write a poem, hopefully not, but if he wanted to write a poem or do other kind of documentation, he'd take out his pencil and his field notebook and he'd write himself a note, which isn't going to disturb other people, but somebody talking on their phone. So if Richard Gere is telling somebody this poem he's just creating on the, other people are hearing it, so it's disrupting their experience, and there's a lot of that. So it's not only is how is that technology using you or what are you doing with it, but what is it doing to the people around you?
Yeah, great. And perhaps why are you here?
Exactly.
If you're going to still be, yeah. So the nice thing about a pencil, of course, is it's a piece of technology, for one thing, that he knew inside out, right? He really was a power user of the pencil. He made pencils, he improved pencils, and it doesn't have your mail on it. You take it out, you use it, and then it goes away. You can even sharpen it right there in the woods with your little knife sharpener. You don't have to bring ink to fill your pen. It's just a wonderful, handy device without all the kind of complications that those other tools, your phone, can take.
And Thoreau, when he was out in the field, when he's out in the woods, was writing in basically a field notebook, small notes. The journal that we think of as that time he's writing in comes later in the day or another day later. So, and we don't actually, there aren't really field notes left. I mean, there aren't many extant, so we don't really know what he was writing in them, but it's most likely short notes, short things, just to remember that experience, so that the most of the time he's out there is really experiential.
Yeah. And the more you take photos, it's so easy to do. It's hard to stop. Kristen, do you want to talk about your calendar project and how you're using technology as a good power user to bring us closer to Thoreau's text?
Well,
process?
So I should say first of all that I've been pulled into the digital humanities world somewhat against my inclination as a great book person and not at all a technophile. But because this material, the calendar project, lends itself so perfectly to digital application, so Thoreau, as people may or may not know, in the last few years of his life, started keeping really rigorous phenological data about the seasons changing. The first time that flowers bloom, the first time birds appear, lots and lots of charts. And actually, I have to just say, to correct your introduction just a little bit, that I'm not in any way attempting to produce a complete calendar, which would, I'd be 1,000 years old before that happened. So we are trying to, though, get online some of those charts, and they're really extraordinary. And one of the things that's extraordinary about them is that he charts not only, in a few of the charts, he charts not only the seasonal phenomena, but also his own seasonal phenomena. So things like the first day that he lights a fire in November, say, and the first day he doesn't have a fire in April, the first day he wears his greatcoat, the first day he takes off his greatcoat. Actually, April is very funny because he's always taking it on and taking it off again. There's a first day without it, and then a first day you need it again. So which is so New England spring. But so they're wonderful charts, and they chart across the years these firsts, right? These first seasonal phenomena. And when I showed them to digital humanities people for the first time, they said oh, it's a database. And that made sense. I mean, they're grids. And so he was using he constructed a kind of database to keep track of this vast amount of seasonal phenomena that he had stored in the journal. It's also a kind of index to the journal, so he's taking information from the multi-volume journal and transcribing it into the charts. And so one of the things I think is fascinating, for example, is that he was going from the field notes, which Jeffrey mentioned, to the journal, then to the charts. So it's a very complex web of textual, almost like hyperlink kind of stuff that's happening in his creation of this calendar project. And so it's a way, putting it online is first and foremost a way to get some of these charts out there available, transcribed, so people can see them. But it also, I think, is really a way of highlighting the interrelationality of the texts, their kind of proto-digital quality, and show that the way that he was thinking about presenting time in this sort of synchronic way. So the digital medium is really ideal for that. In fact, it's hard to think about any other way of presenting it. I wish we could have like a big book, but that's financially difficult and also logistically difficult. So.
Ask a question. Where are the physical
They're
calendars?
mostly at the Morgan Library in New York,
York.
but they're kind of scattered, like all of Thoreau's manuscripts. They're in various places. Some at the Huntington.
So you use text encoding to do it. Is that enough, or can you see this sort of growing now that you've seen how learning some computer skills can really make you able to do and ask questions and read text in a new way?
It could be a huge. The dream would be like you have, photographs of all the different species he mentions and like the scientific information, and it would really. I really loved the point in the presentation of the game about, not reading Thoreau as either science or literature. That's so important. And so this project has a wonderful possibilities for breaking down those kinds of binaries. I teach at a small public liberal arts college with no IT support, and so I'm like a one-woman show on that with my students. And so, I don't know, but I'm hopeful that it will grow and expand, and other people will pick up the work.
And it's actually been the calendar's been an important resource for scientific research.
Yes.
In the case of
absolutely, yes.
Richard Premack's work.
About global warming, absolutely.
Yeah. So that makes me think, Jeff, when you were reading, you should see the annotated Walden. Kristen's already talked about the sort of number of texts that you can hear echoes of or even phrases from, not to mention all the other kinds of references that are being and gestures that are being made in Walden. So the Walden text has these it's got the central text of Walden, and then on either side of the page we've got all of Jeff's wonderful and annotations to what's going on those pages. It sort of sounds like, what would a digital version have been like for you to do there, and would it have been an even better or a great opportunity?
Yeah, if I created an digital annotated edition of Walden, the fact that you could then link to the full text if somebody wanted to read that full text of something that Thoreau was just citing would be wonderful. It would just be endless. So yeah, as with the calendar, it's just something that would be for research purposes monumental. I think, and there's other ways we're using digital work, digital humanities. There's the Digital Thoreau site put together by SUNY Geneseo and the Thoreau Society and the Walden Woods Project, where all the different drafts of Walden exist on this site, and you can literally compare one or more of the versions of Walden side by side, so the first and the third, or all of them, however many you want, something that could never be done before and you couldn't do in book form. It would be literally impossible. And so there's lots of ways that digital humanities is increasing our knowledge and helping our understanding of text that would not have been possible before.
Yeah. I know I'm really sort of envious of the classics department at Holy Cross, because they're doing this open source translate of manuscripts that are in various libraries' possession. And it's getting a lot of young people really interested because they feel like there's something they can do and contribute to the helping to translate all these, so much old text that just sits there otherwise in the vault. Do you think this is a way to have people participate, open source the calendar, open source? What would you put in on Walden? What would you link to it as a way to kind of grow the maybe even young person Walden Thoreau net?
Thoreau is amazing in that way. It has this sort of comments feature that you can annotate, so which is just really great. And you can do it. You can do it in groups, so a class can annotate and respond to each other's annotations, and then they have sort of expert annotators, and it's a great, I mean, I think that kind of interactive reading project is really exciting and great. And
So I always thought I didn't know about the drafts being available on that, and I always thought it was terrible that the drafts were locked up at the Huntington, and just any old person couldn't go and see them. So now that's fixed. But if you do the comments, are they saved just for you on your own account, or are they saved so everybody can see
Everyone
them?
can share them.
everyone can share.
Really?
So they've set up, it's
Wow.
like a social media
Right.
platform.
Social commentary, yeah.
Social commenting, yeah.
Mm.
I don't know enough to know
Yeah,
how
I
it
mean,
works,
there's
but-
places where 2 classes or 3 classes can talk to each other, and that's more private.
Yeah.
But you could go on and put a comment on some part of the text,
Wow.
either
Yeah.
asking a question or making a comment or whatever, and then somebody could respond to that and it just keeps
Are
growing.
people doing that?
They are.
Yeah, it's
People
cool.
actually, great.
That's
Useful
amazing.
for a resource.
We,
Super.
Paul
Schacht.
Schacht at SUNY Geneseo and I did an experiment where his class was reading Walden and my class was reading it at the same time online, and they had to respond to one another, sort of from SUNY Geneseo to UMaine Farmington, and that was really cool. It was really fun to see that
great.
happening. So.
It does make you feel like we're in a new era. Like if you can have Walden in a video game, whoever thought we'd be seeing that? You know, the world is open for what could happen and where this could go. Bill, can you tell us? So we've talking about how taking control of technology, making it our tool rather than it, or ways that technology can take us closer to Thoreau's works, as the case of the Calendar Project. You talk about I'm interested in one, in just your digital Sabbath as a way of using Thoreau's sort of deliberate choices to get control of technology. And I loved also even the smaller idea of Walden zones as something you can use any time of day, not just on a special event. And whether that's still as vibrant as it was 6 years ago when you
Sure.
championed the idea.
Yeah, thank you for asking. So, so in the book about Thoreau, in the chapter about Thoreau in my book, I try to learn lessons from him about how to live today. And so one of the lessons that actually didn't come from Thoreau himself when we did it, but my family, when my son was about 7, my wife and I decided that we saw him getting addicted to the screen, and we decided we were all too addicted to the screen, and we were sort of having our backs to each other in the evening at home instead of being together. So we started taking weekends offline, and we called it the Internet Sabbath. And this was a time when nobody was ever talking about digital Sabbaths or detox or whatever. This would be, if he was 7, this was 2004 or 5 that we started doing this. And we took the whole weekend offline for 5 years. So every weekend and we didn't have smartphones at the time, so if we unplugged the internet, the broadband, that was it. And it was amazing. It really revolutionized our lives. It was sort of like a little mini family version of Thoreau going to his cabin in a way, but I only got that connection when I started reading him. We were already doing the Sabbath when I started reading him from my book. So I talk about it in that context. And then the other thing I talk about in the chapter on Thoreau is an idea that he gave me in reading Walden, which is very few of us could have the great chance to have a little extra home somewhere or spend 2 years somewhere else and then come back. So why not create a zone in your own house or apartment that's your little Walden zone where no devices are used there and where you're sort of unplugging whenever you're in that room or that part of the living room or whatever. You could have a basket where people have to put their phones. It sounds like kind of a ridiculously simple idea, but I think that we have to come up with simple solutions to being so connected. And in our case, we didn't really need to do that because we were doing our weekend thing. But I've met a lot of people who've done it.
And did you? I know schools are doing it. It's spreading. Maybe
over
some
the
of you have had. You want to share your experiences with that. On a slightly different note, you said you are at MIT Media Lab. And this is sort of a question for all of you. What other ways might you bring in that Thoreau's ideas have influenced the way you use technology? Whether Jeff and Kristen have done similar, Sabbaths or other things. But Bill, this idea of reconfiguring or reinventing, is that how you put social media? Is Thoreau involved with an inspiration there at all?
Right. So I should say that my book is really, really questioning the digital revolution. And so I thought that when it came out, the last people I would hear from would be technologists, because I sort of thought it was, in a thorough way, I was kind of anti-them.
Yeah.
And they were the first people I heard from, actually, when the book came out. And one of the first speech invitations I got was to speak at Google. And I got there to Google, and the guy who welcomed me, was a very senior person there, said, "Oh, we're so glad you're here." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, because we're all miserable. We're the most connected people on earth. This is Google, and we hate it. We believe in it, but we hate what it's doing to our lives."
Wow.
So I got up there at Google and talked about Thoreau and Seneca and all these philosophers that I had discussed in my book, and they were open to it, and we had a great conversation. So that led down a road where I started meeting more and more technologists, and they started asking me to do projects with them. And I'm kind of a nerd at heart. I really like technology, actually. So through a long series of steps, I wound up getting invited to have an appointment at the Media Lab, which is all about building stuff in a group that got a huge grant from Twitter, actually, and is now supported by a bunch of other companies, to rethink social media. So actually, social media has been really good at destroying old hierarchies and sort of flattening the landscape, as we know, but it hasn't been so good so far at solving social problems and sort of taking us to a better place. So that's what we're trying to do. So we're creating new social media in a bunch of areas, but the main ones now are education, governance, and news and journalism. And I'm focusing on the news journalism and the governance part. And I have one thing that I invented with one of the students last year that I'm trying to turn into a startup. So that's the first thing that is going out of our group into the world, if I succeed.
Yeah. So what do you make of the fact that they were so interested in you and,
Well, it
open
was
to
it
sort
was
of Thoreauvian critique?
Yeah, it was very heartening because I didn't know any technologists. So in truth, and you can pick this up if you read my book, between the lines, there's a kind of a antagonism toward them. And I sort of thought technologists were kind of against us and were just trying to almost take over my consciousness.
Yeah.
They're human beings. I'm embarrassed that it took, this journey to get to know them and realize that. But, they're just like the rest of us. And this room must have technologists because we're at WPI, So that was a huge lesson for me, and it's humbling to think of how I missed that. And I'm in a building full of people who totally get the questions we're talking about, and they come up all the time.
Yeah.
And there's all these groups in the building that are trying to, there's one group that's trying to have a device that we would wear that would sense our mood changes, including when we're depressed, so that people we're connected to would know that and maybe help us, Beautiful things, that are kind of, would be amazing augmentations of our connectedness in many ways. So anyway, that's my story.
So when I look at technology, and I have a slightly different look at it than Bill, so the idea of an internet Sabbath, which is intriguing and I think wonderful, also implies a going back. So whenever you take a break, whether you're putting your phone in a basket, whether you're going into a classroom and putting it down, the idea is that as soon as you're out of that situation, whatever it is, you're going to put it back on and use it just as much. So I would think, and I don't know how you're working on changing social media, but the idea of becoming less dependent on it or using it less would be a much greater thing than just stopping for 2 hours. It doesn't really solve the problem. For me, I try not to use technology that much. I do have a phone. It's about 6 years old. Does anybody remember these? It actually doesn't do anything other than talk. I mean, you can't take pictures with it. You can't play music on it. You can't do much with it. It doesn't tell me where I'm going if I get lost. It's a phone. I don't feel I need any of the rest of it. So I'm probably one of the few people that doesn't have a smartphone yet. I hope to be a holdout as long as I can keep a phone like this going. My laptop is used for word processing, for writing. I don't have games on it. I don't use it for any other purpose, really. And so I try to use the technology, but to use it in a limited way.
I guess there's a lot of ways I could talk about this. I mean, the first thing that seems important, just for the sake of honesty, to say is I have an iPhone and I'm completely addicted to it. I make my students, when we're reading Walden, I make them, and I do this myself, take a 20-minute walk, at least 20 minutes once a week, without technology, just to see what that experience is like. Many of them have never done that, really, at least not as kind of young adults, and kind of check out where they are and think about the place where they are, and do that without any technological aid. And it's hard for me. It's hard for me to like leave my phone. I totally have that addiction, so I confess to that. But I will say, on another level, I live in a pretty remote place in Western Maine, and I have experimented with getting off all social media and like really trying to, and I really missed my friends, and so I have found that email and even things like Facebook, there are people whose babies I just always want to see. I always want to see a picture of my best friend from college, her little daughter, and that is so valuable to me, that it's not, I can't forego that. And so I have found that the way that Thoreau influences my thinking about media, social media, online, is that he's so profound in thinking about relationality and the complexities of relationality and how important relationality is in our lives. And so I try to have those interactions be quality interactions and deep relationships, even though they're over a digital medium. So I guess that's what I would say.
I still lie on the bed when I talk to my sister on the iPhone, so she has my complete concentration. She, on the other hand, is like milling around, or my son is at the computer, reading the computer while he talks to me on the phone. So there are ways in which you can still use the phone as that kind of intimate, locked-in experience you might want. I mean, one thing that's coming out nice here is that, one, there's the users and how we can configure our technologies to satisfy ourselves. I just found out that you can actually turn off the double klingle when you get a text message. You don't have to have any klingle, or you can just have one klingle. But it was that second klingle that made me re-answer the text because it was so insistent. So I don't go into settings often enough. But also the idea that the producers are, thinking along, using, drawing on these ideas, so they can just make the devices that much cooler and that much more wonderful in terms of giving us what we might really hope to have without the kind of dreck that we sometimes feel like inundates it.
I feel like we're going to look back on we're definitely going to look back on this time as so primitive in terms of digital.
Really?
We're going to laugh at Facebook. If we live long enough, it's going to be like, can you believe we used that? It was so badly designed, and it was not.
Right.
There wasn't much you could do with it. And even now, social media are being invented for purposes different from the ones my group's working on, for new business purposes that are trying to make it help you focus. Like, I don't know if anybody uses Slack, but it's this relatively new social app for teams to work together, and we use it in my group, and it's great because you're off the horrible email world, and you're off Facebook, and you're just focusing on this whatever project is you're doing, and you're all on Slack together doing that.
Yeah.
It's a real focus tool. It's
Yeah.
great,
Yeah.
and so I think we're just going to keep making it. I'm just incorrigible optimist, but it's going to keep getting better.
Yeah, and that kind of points a little bit to just the same word of focus that Tracy was bringing out about what media can do for us, and it also seems like, and I'll just bring the focus back here, that okay, I lost that train of thought. It'll come back. To switch, but I want it to come back right now. Let's see. So, well. To switch gears a minute, you could say, it seems to me, that one of the problems that perhaps Thoreau suffers from today, and you could say I'm wrong, in this country, he tends to have a fairly middle-class readership. Would you say that's true? And that environmentalism now, sort of the cutting edge of environmentalism, is all about social justice and issues like Flint, Michigan, and the fact that the poor are getting the biggest hit from the global warming that we're perpetrating. So that environmentalism is really kind of crossing class lines for sure. But that balance, which is one of the things that we've really been talking about right now, is maybe still a kind of middle class, luxury to be able to hope to get a better sense of balance in our lives. Between the busyness and the quietude that we might seek. Do you feel like like digital technology has a way of cutting through class barriers, of breaking down, bringing Thoreau out of the middle class world and more to a wider public here, for people who don't have the time maybe to read.
I don't know, my debt-ridden students very much identify with Thoreau. You know,
Yeah.
that opening
Good.
stuff about debt and how it imprisons you, and the stuff about college in particular. They totally get it.
Right.
So I think, you know, I mean,
Right.
a lot of it is just getting it in our students' hands. You know, I love teaching well. I mean, in some ways, it's the most teachable book that I teach. You know, they love it. I always think I do this whole thing of like, I know you're not going to like this, and here's all the reasons you're going to hate it. And they're like, what are you talking about? We totally get it. So it's I don't know. That's been my experience. And they are, you know, they're all working. They're all working way too hard, and you know, without enough time to do it. But they do it, and they connect to it. So, you know, I think that's it. I think Thoreau has that's a reputation problem, but not a
Right.
problem with the text.
Great, yeah.
And I talk to a lot of high school students and college students, and we work with UMass Lowell, and one of the teachers there brings out students from the Lawrence area and the Lowell area who will be first-generation college students, poor families, nobody else in the family has gotten educated, and they come and we talk about Walden, we talk about Thoreau, what it means, and they strip away all the myths about Thoreau and going off to a cabin in the woods, and it's really about, you know, questioning their lives. And when they look at what Thoreau is talking about and really kind of have a chance to dialogue about it, they love what Thoreau has to say because it's so pertinent to their own lives and the choices they're going to make.
I have found that in my travels talking about my book, a lot of them have been at colleges and universities, and I have found that there's one place I've been to repeatedly that's the only school I've spoken at that's open enrollment. Everybody there is from a family where they're the first one to go on just about and to go to college, and really, really working class. It's really rural Kentucky. Best conversations there about all of these questions, and Walden in particular. So
Yeah.
it's working.
Great.
And you know, it's a difficult read.
Yeah,
I mean, Emerson
Especially
and
that
Thoreau are
chapter
kind of hard
one.
to read today,
yeah.
but somehow
Yeah, they
because
get it.
there's so much value there, it's worth it.
I want to cling to that word value, and that was the famous forgotten question that I had earlier. It was just as you were talking about, you know, Facebook being, you know, designed in changing in terms of its design, maybe principles, its objectives. Just this whole idea of Thoreau getting us to think about the values and the objectives and the goals of what we see as valuable and what should be the goal of our design. Is it profit? Is it speed? Is it ease of use, or are there other things that we also want? Is it that we want our cell phones to help us have solitude? Is it that we want, you know, Facebook to give us quality interactions rather than, however we would describe some of the feeling that we get through that sociability now, that we're going to his philosophical idea of economy as a way of thinking about what we value most and using those principles to help inform our practice and our use, our development and our use. Any questions you all want to pose to each other that we've touched on, but you feel like could get explored further?
I'm sure I could come up with one.
Well, I've got one last one in conclusion, which is, you know, Thoreau's rallying cry, or obviously many, but I'll just be selective since he gave us so many. Simplify, simplify. And is that still super potent? Does that speak to the younger generation who might be wired differently and not have the same kind of fondness for what I hear in that, having grown up in a simpler time without a cell phone, and longing for, you know, going back to a kind of simpler, less device-ridden life. Could you imagine, you know, a more digitally informed rallying cry that might have even more legs, or to just continue, you know, not to give up that one, but does simplify still seem to you super potent, and do you feel hopeful in this time, given the way you're I'm guessing your work life feels, your home life feels, that it's anything besides like a nice phrase, a nice dream.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I think for me, an important thing about reading Walden is that it's not a lifestyle handbook. I mean, sometimes you can read him that way, and I think people do read him that way, and there's value in that. But that's certainly not all it is. I really take those words philosophically as a sort of that attempt to reduce is a philosophical move to say what do we mean by the word need. Like when I say I need to take this call, right? Like, what do I need to do that, or am I choosing that, and why am I choosing it? And I think that kind of that effort at reduction is something that anybody can do, and it is really valuable. And that getting rid of possessions and getting rid of stuff and getting rid of technology may be part of that. And I think that for Thoreau, it obviously was part of that. But the heart of it is about questioning our habits, whatever our habits are. And that's the thing that is so useful to me about rereading Walden every couple of years, is that it makes me question everything that I do, not just technology use, but what I'm eating, where our house, just everything, how I vote, everything in my life, I question when I'm reading Walden, and that's a gift, And so I think that to me that simplify is about rethinking what we need, rethinking why we do things, the most basic things, and kind of building up from that questioning. So I think you can do that move in a lot of different ways, maybe technologically enhanced ways, maybe, I think that's idiosyncratic and personal to every person, but I think we still need that motto.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, it certainly, I think, resonates. I mean, we talk about the complexities of everything we're talking about tonight. We keep using that word complex in relation to the overload we get from digital media, from social media, all of that. And so just the idea that you can simplify it in any way, if you can reduce it, simplify it, get rid of the extraneous things you don't need. So that message is definitely very pertinent and very needed, I think, today.
I want to say that I think that younger people like this generation, you guys, get that message much more than anybody ever has, because they were born into a digital world. And I see this with my students. They are just completely pursuing simplicity because, in a sense, you have to get things done. I didn't finish my little story about our Sabbath. We gave it up after 5 years because my son was in middle school, and his assignments were starting to come online. So we agreed we learned a lot in 5 years. We'll all do our own rituals. And so we do still. I still take Saturdays off. But interestingly, when he got to be a sophomore in high school, he gave up video gaming. Completely gave it up, because he said, I'm not going to do well, and I'm not going to get into good college if I don't do this. And it was hard. It was really, really hard. But I think he was able to do it because we had those 5 years of simplicity. Once you've done simplicity, you can always access it. It's in there somewhere. That's what I like about Thoreau going back to civilization. Doing it for 2 years is a powerful thing, and in a way, I think it changes you forever. So, and I think, I just see young people experimenting with this in ways much more interesting than us old folks, frankly.
That seems like a nice moment to turn it out to, not to put the young people on the spot. Anybody out there who would like to ask a question, who was thinking things as we were talking that you'd like to throw into the mix, would like to challenge anything you've heard so far. And Tracy's also still with us, so if you'd like to bring the video game back in to our exploration of how Thoreau and technology speak to each other in really powerful ways, we would welcome your input. Yeah.
So, as a high school teacher who has students who are addicted, big time, and my students tell me social media, tunes, listening to tunes, and games are the three big ones for them. And I'm in competition with their constant access. What would you recommend as a high school teacher to a man who loves technology but feels like really old man compared to my students, and I am? What kind of things would you recommend that would be helpful for them to be able to. I've tried things, but I'd like to hear from you. That's what I see right now happening in a high school classroom.
How can you compete
Yes.
with that incredible hold that there? And I invite any of the students, anybody in the room to respond to this live need that I think people have. But does anybody here want to address? Kristen, you teach. You've
Yeah,
been in
I mean,
that
I teach college students, and so what I'm wondering is how much of it is developmental. You know, I don't know. I mean, I think my students, I think they, maybe not right away, but they value the kind of, you know, I do a lot of like really slow, let's move through this sentence and like unpack it, and it's very different from the high speed movement of the digital, and I love it for that reason. I love that change of pace that is required for that kind of slow, really, really slow reading, and I think they like it. You know, after they've gotten a little bit of it, they enjoy it. So I don't know. I guess I haven't. Maybe it's different in college. Maybe they're a little bit older and they're a little bit more mature. So I haven't felt like I needed to. But I do have them do the walk with no technology, because I think that's an important experience to have in reading through and just in being human.
Could I address?
Yeah.
So, another person I talk about in my book is Ben Franklin, and who we were talking about, yeah. And
We also just read a little bit, Franklin.
so he had this principle that he called philosophical self-denial. I think that was the phrase, which is that the only way you're going to give up a bad habit is if you become convinced, truly believe that you have something positive to gain from it. You can't just give it up because it's negative. You have to replace it with something positive. And he was addicted to everything. I mean, he realized when he was in his early 20s, he was a sex addict, he was a wine addict, he had all these problems, and he realized, I'm not going to get anywhere if I keep giving in to these things. So he started keeping this list in his pocket of positive goals through the day. So it wasn't stop going to every party you get invited to, which he used to do. It was enjoy time alone, part of each day, and then he would check it off. I just made that up, but it was like that. And I think that's what you have to do with young people, is get them somehow to see the gain. So my son did this, you know, where he realized, wow, I really want to kind of come out okay in the college sweepstakes and all that, and I'm going to be miserable. I'll have a nice positive at the end of the line if I do this self-denial thing. And he'd been trained, you know, because we had that Sabbath. Most of these students haven't done that. So there has to be a way where, and it requires some conversation, I think, and talking about, you know, things they're sacrificing, that they're going to be unhappy about down the road, and what they'll gain in a positive sense if they change.
Have any of the younger people here taken a technology Sabbath or gone through any of these sorts of exercises, taken walks without your iPhone? Want to speak to just how that was, and you know, if that felt like it made an impression that was different, or an experience that was different than, you know, being connected. Yeah.
Yeah, I just deleted all my social media because I want to learn Spanish, and there's like a Spanish learning app called Duolingo. So I found that if you can like take away the sensations that you really are addicted to, you have to be able to replace them with something that you know, as you said, something you know will have as positive an outcome. So if you can give them that positive outcome, then yeah.
Well, at Holy Cross we have spring break immersion every year, and you go with like a group of like 10 or so other Holy Cross students, and like you're not usually in places that have very good cell service. So I mean, they also like they tell you like not to use your phone very often because you're doing community service projects. And the first day it's kind of weird because you don't really know most people in your group, so you just like automatically you're like, I'm gonna look at my phone, but then you're like, I don't have my phone. So it's like your security blanket is taken away from you, and it causes you to get more involved with the group that you're with and also in the community. So I did that last year, and I ended up like forgetting that I had my phone even with me not really using it very much.
Once you came back, were you back to normal, or did it change a little bit?
Much, but I mean, also was like you're on campus for a few days before other people get back, so you're spending a lot more time with your group, and I didn't really feel like I was using my phone as much until we got like back into the full swing of school.
Would you like to use it less now? Now that you've had that experience?
Not really. I don't know. I feel like I don't know. I feel like technology is so central to so much that we do now
Yeah.
that it would be kind of hard to be in college and not have a lot of the technology that we're used to.
I should stop emailing my students so often. So we're certainly part of the problem. Or your coaches, right? Constant contact. Tracy, do you want to come into this conversation at all? This sort of war between addiction, that's such a loaded big word, and media having that, and our devices having that claim on us, and
I have a sort of
space.
odd perspective.
Yeah.
I was thinking about something personal, and that is that a couple of years ago I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I had just started a walking routine, and I was walking 5 miles a day without my phone in my neighborhood, and I walk a certain path, and I've walked that path since that time through chemo and getting better and coming back. I walk that path every day, and I think that getting to know my neighborhood in that way over that time, over that change in my life, has been one of the most valuable things that I've ever experienced, and had everything to do with putting away the phone and putting away and putting aside the time, you know. And I think sometimes you need, like you had a less dramatic sort of change that made you put your phone away, but for me it was like a wake up call that required me to listen, you know. And you know, I think it's not just young people. It's there. You know, we are all equally addicted, and sometimes we require more drastic wake up calls, right? You know, but we don't need a basket. Then we just have our own neighborhoods, and we can get to know them. You know, that was just what I was thinking about while you were asking that particular question.
I was also just thinking, not just thinking about the value you can get from stepping away, but to think, am I getting value from this when I'm using it, or am I just using it in a rote way? We're not even thinking when we're swipe, check. And so I think Thoreau would say it's when you do that kind of mindless interaction with it that it's become problematic. So it's all about thinking about value, right? Value when I'm not on it, and value when I am on it, and depth. To the point in your book, real depth, you know, depth of experience. So.
I just wanted to ask, Kristen, you said that you try to have quality interactions even through social media. And I think that we need to think about the word like quality. Like we're so connected nowadays. Like I'm always talking to my friends, and the constant connection, does that take away from the quality of interactions? This is a question for everyone. What do you think, like the fact that we can always communicate and not just face to face? Do we have our interactions less significant because of that? Or are we talking about mindless things? Like, what do you think about that?
I'll just say, and this is maybe generational. So I had a student a few years ago who I became really close with, and she didn't have internet at her house, and she was my research assistant and also our babysitter. And then I ended up helping her to go to graduate school, and so we just spent a ton of time communicating. And because she didn't have internet, we texted, and she texted with like everyone in her life. That was her principal mode of communication. But it was the first texting relationship that I ever had, and it was so overwhelming. And I was like, how can you do this with everyone in your life? It's insane. Because, you know, if I would be 20 minutes late in answering a text, she would say, like, what, are you mad? Like, what's going on? You know? And so just adjusting to that, mentality was so, and now of course there are a few more people that I have that relationship to, but it is really interesting. It's a completely different mode, and I do think I have to say, maybe this is just because I'm old, but texting is hard. I think it's really hard so when I was talking about having quality interactions, I've had over the course of the past few months some loss, a loss of a very dear friend, and some really meaningful exchanges via social media about him. But they're long, I mean, they're thoughtful, and they're writing, as opposed to the kind of, I love my texting relationship with this one student because it's very funny. It's snappy and funny. But I'm really glad that not all of my relationships are like that. I would explode. I can't keep up. So yeah, for me, thinking about taking time. Time is important. Speed is important. If everything is fast, it's hard for things to have depth, I think. So.
Yeah, and then for me, it's not like I don't have any technology or try not to use it. I have Facebook. I connect with my children that way and family, and I love that being able to be connected so easily with daughters who aren't living in the same state. But it's also, there's an overwhelmingness. There's so much information that people are sharing that I actually don't read it anymore. So if I'm on Facebook and I look and see what everybody's posting, it's just, I go right by them. And I'm not paying any attention. So when something important might come along that somebody's sending me, which is a serious message or whatever, I'm reading it superficially. And so I'm actually missing things because there's so much coming at me. I don't like being connected all the time. When I'm having breakfast, for instance, I'll sit and eat my breakfast. And I have family members saying, what are you doing? Sometimes I don't turn the lights on all the way. And it's like, I'm having breakfast. And it's like, but you're not reading, you're not watching television, you're not listening to the news, you're not listening to music. And it's like, I'm just enjoying that moment. And what I see, because we're so bombarded with it all the time, is that people are losing that ability to just sit for 5 minutes. It's very, very difficult to do that. And actually, just get back to your question, Jerry, just a little bit. When I talk to high school students, particularly, we Skype from the Walden Woods Project for classes who can't come to visit us. And I joke with them because I know they all have their phones. And I say, so when the bell rings in a few minutes and you're going to leave, what's the first thing you're going to do? You're going to take out your phone. And usually during our conversation, we talk a lot about Thoreauvian deliberation, that sense that it's not what you do, it's thinking about it for a moment before you do it. And so I ask them, like, when you go out of the room, when the bell rings and you go out, can you just think about it for a minute? Can you stop? Can you not pick up your phone immediately? Give it a minute. Most of them said they can't. But what I also hope, and I know I'm wrong being hopeful about this, is that maybe one of those students actually takes the challenge and stops for just 1 minute and then realizes, oh my gosh, I got away with, I lived, I survived, I didn't have my phone on for a minute, maybe I can do 2 minutes next time. But it's that sense of what are you getting out of that experience? What is it really doing for you? And if you don't pick up your phone when you're going from this class to the next class, has the world ended? I mean, what has happened? And if you don't hear about it, what difference is it really going to make? I've been at parties and things where people are talking about something and a name or a reference comes up that somebody can't remember what it is, and somebody pulls out their phone, goes to Wikipedia to explain it, and I'm thinking, I bet if I asked you 10 minutes from now who that person was or what that book was, you won't remember. Because it doesn't mean anything. You haven't spent any time. It's just very, very surface, as you said. So I try to, not be pulled in by as much as is going on around me if I can help it. But I can't always help it.
Mr. Kramer, you mentioned that when you went to a concert, one of the performers told everyone to put their phones away and just experience it in the moment. But wouldn't you say that if you were able to film it, that even though you weren't getting that really great quality experience the first time, that in the future you'll have that memory, you'll have that video on your phone, and those half experiences that you get every single time you watch that video is way better than having that one full memory that kind of starts to fade after a while, that you kind of don't really get that feeling anymore?
Well, let me say that if I am sitting behind you when you're doing this and I can't see the performer, I want to have that moment with, then your technology would be interfering with me. But I also really feel that when you go to a large concert now, particularly a large concert, the one I went to was a very small venue, but you go to a large concert, and most of what you're seeing now is on the screen because the performers are so far away, you can't see them. So virtually what you're doing is sitting in a large room watching television or watching a screen. And so I think for most people, and I don't want to sound ageist, but for your generation, that interaction with the performer, it's the same as watching on TV or on your computer. That you're losing that sense of intimacy that I think when I went to concerts so long ago, you say, my God, that's whoever it is, it's that there's Dylan. It's like, wow, I'm in a room with him. But now I don't think people get that same feeling. And I think part of it is because people aren't willing to just sit there for 2 hours and experience what's going on. And the memories do fade, but they come back every so often. So not as clear, but.
I was going to ask a WWHDTD question about whether there would be wireless in the cabin at Walden Pond, or if he would just go and access Emerson's broadband. But of course, that question is rendered moot by the existence of the smartphone. And I think the difference is illustrated by the weekend-long Sabbath versus the 20-minute Sabbath. We're clearly in a different period now. I wanted to instead ask a question about rurality and urbanity and the way in which technology inflects our experience of the rural, our experience of the urban. After all, the Walden Woods Project is an attempt to preserve a kind of rurality in a rapidly urbanizing Massachusetts. That urbanizing was happening even in Thoreau's time. But I located a quote in Jeffrey Kramer's edited I to Myself, the Journals, which is for sale over at the table. If you're interested, you're welcome. This is from fairly late in the Journals, from 1860. And the sentence that really captured me, and it connects to Kristen's comment about the role of the iPhone in rural Maine. He writes, almost all our improvements, so-called, tend to convert the country into the town. And that has a certain kind of resonance in 1860, but I think it has maybe a different kind of resonance now. So does your iPhone then convert rural Maine into a kind of urbanized space that changes your experience of that rurality? It's a question specifically to Kristen, but I'd like the rest of the panel to also reflect on it.
That's interesting. I mean, I guess there is a kind of placelessness of being online. So I would say more than I don't think of online as a urban kind of space, but I think of it as placeless. And so it's true that when I am doing this, I have vacated my place and I'm not paying attention to it, as Tracy was talking about being present in her neighborhood so beautifully. And so I do worry about that. But I don't know that that's I don't know in that particular case if that's an urban rural. I mean, I think in some ways if you live in a great urban neighborhood that you're not paying attention to because you're on your iPhone, it's as anti-urban as it is. It's anti-place in some way. And so I mean, not intrinsically, but that tends to be the effect. So I think figuring out a way to connect with where you are. Whether that is urban or rural, for me, is the central question.
And I think, I mean, this is sort of a broader, different kind of context, but when I think about technology and the effect on small farms, for instance, that anytime technology works its way into a system, and as we become more cross-cultural and universal in what we think, what we see, what we know, it is hard to remain rural. And so when you have those small farms, they're all dying out, is because they can't compete. And young people who grew up on farms want to go to that city because that's what they're seeing on their phones or they're on their television in the movies. So there's that thing you can't compete with, same as why you can't get them to shut off their phones. But I don't know how to stop it.
I would say that it's clear that the smartphone is not replicating the city because people are still dying to go to cities and still doing what Jeff described. Cities are bigger than ever, more popular than ever. For the first time ever, a majority of people on Earth have moved to cities. So but it is giving us this sense of kind of bustle and busyness. And I live in a rural place. I live on Outer Cape Cod, and one of the reasons we did that Sabbath was because we had moved from Washington, D.C. to that place specifically to get away from the city, and all of a sudden we were getting it from the devices, so I'm very sympathetic to that. But all these years now thinking about it, I think it's so much more complicated than that. You know, E.B. White said one of the easiest, best places to be alone is New York City, and I can really relate to that. It's really true in a way. The big impersonal city, you can really be by yourself in a different way. So I think it's a very layered, nuanced kind of question we have to all work out for ourselves.
But I do think it's really key, the point that Kristen brought up, that how much our devices shut off our attention of our surroundings, that we sort of have a toggle switch. We're either, you know, texting, looking down, or on the phone, and, you know, sort of maybe glazed over, kind of aware of where we are, but not really paying attention. And it kind of goes back to this idea, well, what's the positive? There's something positive about being on the phone, but what could be really positive about paying attention to your surroundings? What could be positive about Tracy taking the same walk for 5 years without the phone? I mean, you could think that's why I'm on the phone, because I've taken the same walk for 5 years. It's boring. There's nothing here, you know, it's just campus. It's just, you know, it's just a train platform. There's nothing here for me to look at. I need to call somebody. I need a distraction. Can you see, like, you know, that's sort of Thoreau's idea that you can just keep walking and walking over the same ground and travel widely in Concord. But did you sort of feel like the more interesting the neighborhood became, the less you needed distraction from it?
Me?
Yeah.
The neighborhood has changed and grown, and there are new people have. Well, in California, there's this whole xeriscaping thing going on, right? So the entire neighborhood has changed its foliage, and it's just fascinating. And I've redone my garden, and you know, everyone has changed everything. And but what hasn't changed is the people are the same people, and the dogs are the same dogs, and the streets are the same streets, but all the other inhabitants, the vegetation inhabitants are all different. It's great.
There's the hand way on the back.
It's been said that as a species, we mirror our technology to almost the same extent that our technology mirrors us. So I'm wondering, do you think Thoreau might have thought maybe he wasn't rallying against technology, but against something that's in us, that's driving us to these changes? Especially if you consider that technology could be just defined as anything that extends our abilities, like fire or a nail, a hammer, a wheel, simple tools.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think he was against habit, you know? He was against, I mean, one of the things I find really interesting in thinking about Thoreau is that we could be having this conversation about like junk food, right? Or money, other things that we're addicted to as a culture. And I think, it raises this interesting question of how he has that wonderful line about, I've never met a man who was fully awake. How could I have looked him in the face? And I think about that line a lot because it's his way of confessing, right? Even I'm not fully awake. I'm still engulfed in habits and ways of living that I'm just doing because they're what we do. And he really wanted to ask us to question every single thing that we do. And so the question arises, is that possible? I mean, obviously our brains, we have habits for reasons of economy in our brains. It takes up a lot of time to question every single aspect of your day. But I think it's worth thinking about and doing. And I do think that is a part of human nature. It's really a part of the brain, but one that's worth pushing back against a little bit.
Yeah, Emerson said that machines mechanize so that we become the machines. And there was a man named Etzler, back in the 1830s and 40s who wrote a book about paradise to be gained for all humankind. And basically it was a book in which he thought, and science wasn't ready to do it in his day, but he basically in his book predicts solar power and wind power and water power and all sorts of the ways that he believed could energize, give energy to the world so that there'd be no need for labor anymore. Thoreau did a review of this book, and although he was intrigued by the possibilities, what he didn't like to see was that we became machines. We became something that was insignificant in relation to society, but also that we lost touch, that labor itself he felt was really important. And that he thought he was a better writer, he said, for the calluses on his hand. And so I think for people like Thoreau and Emerson, the progress is great, but what are we losing and what are we giving up? And so looking at something like Etzler, where the whole world could live labor-free, and we could enjoy ourselves and live basically a paradise. But for somebody like Thoreau, he looks at it, and you have all these people not working, and without work, what are you?
So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, I think that Thoreau just lived long enough to know and read Darwin, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think there's a way in which we are machines. We're machines for survival. And many of these things that are programmed into us are, we now know, the product of evolution. They didn't really know this in those early Darwinian days, but now we know. These are aspects of our brains and our bodies, really, that really used to serve a purpose. Having a short attention span used to be good because they were threatening creatures around you, and we really don't need it anymore. And my take on Thoreau's message is that it kind of reminds us that many of our greatest achievements as a species are about learning to override that programming when we don't need it anymore. So, you know, we're not programmed to read. That's why every child has to learn to read from square one. But what an amazing achievement that was, that we learned to focus like that and have a long attention span. I would love to read Thoreau if he had lived to today and could see all that Darwinism had taught us, and to see if he would sort of work that into his work somewhat, because he was really touching on it, I think, without even completely realizing it.
Can you just tell me a little bit more about this digital Thoreau? Do you just go online?
You just,
Yep.
yeah, just look up
Type it
digital.
into Google.
Yep,
Yeah.
it'll come right up.
And
Anybody can
Yeah, you
become
set
part
up
of it.
a little account. You know, it's sort of, you have to become a user of it, but anybody can do that. And
Free to use. It's absolutely a wonderful tool. So, you know, we shared other things with you during the summer. So.
Great. Well, I think we've gotten a sort of sample of the ever-changing Thoreauvian landscape and the way in which digital technology can be a very exciting part of that, and that we really don't know where we're going and where we're headed entirely, and that's going to be exciting to discover too, and we're really glad that we had you all here to explore the issue with us. So thanks so much for coming out, and the video game is still up. As far as I know, the books are over there. The panelists are here. Your van is picking you up at 8:30. So you've got 5 minutes at least to mill before then. So thanks again, and thanks to our panelists, and thanks to Whitney.
Yeah, I just, from the Walden Woods Project, want to extend a thank you to the panelists, to Sarah for moderating, to Jim, our partner at WPI, for everyone at WPI who made this happen. Wonderful to work with. To all of you for coming, thank you so much. In our first Lyceum event, we hope for there to be many of these. If you do want to learn more about the Walden Woods Project, go to www.walden.org. Use your technological devices, whichever one you're addicted to. And I just want to highlight a couple of upcoming events. Our second Lyceum event will be on April 14th in Boston at the Old South Meeting House on education and educational access. Megan Marshall, Pulitzer Prize winning author, and Lawrence Buell, Professor Emeritus from Harvard will be there along with Jeff on the panel. It should be a great conversation. On March 12th, we're hosting a Wikipedia edit-a-thon for all things thorough. If he's going to be on Wikipedia, we want him to be represented well. So if you're interested in participating in that, you can email education@walden.org or talk to me afterwards. And I mentioned this to some of the students as they came in. We have an essay contest that is open to people around the world up to age 21. And we would love to hear your thoughts in that. There's a flyer outside. Thank you so much. Thank you, Tracy, for coming from California to present. I failed to say that. So have a wonderful evening. Jeff's books are for sale. Unfortunately, Bill's did not make it here from the snow, probably. But Jeff will be signing outside if you'd like to. And all the panelists, I think, will be taking some questions, and Tracy at the game. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.